The director, the individual who makes a play or a musical happen, is, for want of a better phrase, the engine that keeps everything going. He works with a playwright. He changes things if he has to. He cuts things if he has to. He works with a scenic designer to make sure that the scenery reflects what the play is all about. He is the man who really gets it from the page to the stage. Today we're indeed fortunate to have with us a director of, seriously, international repute, Glen Casale, who has been our co-host a number of times, but during that period never had an opportunity to tell us about his work. And today he will. He has just returned from Europe, where he's done a production of The Wiz, which will tour all over Europe, and has done many productions in the United States of Beauty and the Beast and Peter Pan. My name is Mike Merrick, and I'm a theater producer. And today we will tell you all about the director and his function in producing for the theater. Today, as I said in our introduction, we will deal with the director and what he does and how he functions, or how she functions for that matter. And I'm very pleased indeed to have with us my co-host, Mr. Nate Bynum, who's been here before, who's a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and teaches a special course in acting for the camera. And Nate, thank you very, very much.
Always
for being
good to be
again.
here. My pleasure.
And now, of course, the star of our show this afternoon, Mr. Glen Casale, who many of you who have seen our videos before about producing for the theater are familiar with him. But as I said earlier, we're fortunate that he's here because he can finally talk about what he does, what a director does, what are the problems of a director, how you mount it on the stage. Thanks very much, Glen, for joining us.
Glen, welcome to the show. Always good to be in your presence.
Oh,
sir.
yes, of course. Did they punch your passport when you came in? You know.
This is quite an honor, though. I mean, I know Glen, of course, he's a colleague and a hallmate, but he does work internationally and nationally and locally when he chooses. But he's the first director that I have ever known this sort of relationship who works as much as you do and works on the level that you do. So it's
thanks.
Quite.
You know, you're absolutely right, Nate. One thing I wanted to say that I didn't earlier was there's an old cliche that we've all heard, those who can do and those who can't teach. Well, this guy puts the lie to that because he can, he does, and he teaches.
And the students are the better for it.
That's
obviously.
right.
And he's a great person. Let me say that on camera as well.
Oh, my God. Well, that's it. The show's over. We have nothing else to say.
But Glen, how's it feel to have the table sort of turned? I mean, you do co-host this show, and now we're here asking you questions.
You know, it's interesting. You have to have a whole different point of view about it. So it's interesting. You know, listening to you talk, the one thing I feel about directing, and I think it's something that is a field that I wanted to be in since I was very, very young, to be a director. I started directing when I was about 18, and I feel very lucky that I can do what I do. And that's part of the teaching, to come back and share it and try to help other people have a career. I think that's our mission, and I know Nate feels the same, and that's part of what we're doing here at UNLV.
Well, that's true. You know, there is no formula, Nate. You as a professor here and teaching many creative facets about the camera and, of course, the stage also. But what do you think, as an active, working director, that an individual really needs? What kind of insight does he or she need in order to be a director that is, well, creative, forceful, dynamic, and imaginative?
Well, you know, I think a lot of things go into it. Over the years, as you know, directing has changed. The whole business has changed. It's become more a business about money and how to spend money and what money brings in. So you've got to be aware of that. But I think a director today has to, first of all, direct wherever you can. Direct to get used to it. I think they've also has to be a psychologist. It's very difficult dealing with the different personalities, from the producer to the actor to the stagehand.
Sure.
And I believe you've got to treat them all equally, and you've got to understand where they are and what their problems are. Because, yeah, you've got to be the problem solver. You're the one everybody comes to. You're like the funnel with all these productions, you know? Some of the productions I work on are 100 people backstage with everybody, you know, cast, crew, orchestra backstage. So you're managing 100 people at a time.
You know, as a producer, I've learned and I've observed, I would say, many directors who have to have enough enthusiasm, enough energy, not just for themselves, but for everybody else. They have to be able to say, you can do it. They have to be encouraging. They have to be critical, but constructively critical when they have to be. Wouldn't you say?
Very much like a parent.
Well, yeah.
It's very much like a parent. You've got to know
psychiatrist.
when to be strict and when to be loose. And you've got to understand that each person comes to it with a different background. Everybody's got different backgrounds. So they all don't work Meisner or Stanislavski, or some people have no training. And you've got to make them all work on their own individual level.
You know, is that something you consider, that you are working with actors who have different training methods or training experience, and you have to get them to work together? Because sometimes people with one type of training don't work well with others with a different kind of training. But it's your job, of course, to put this whole vision together.
Absolutely, and I think that, you know, you've got to respect everybody's way of working, and you've got to respect how they're going to get to the part, because I believe the end result for all of us is, the bottom line is the play.
And respect it even if they don't. Sometimes
That's
the
right.
actor,
And
Exactly.
you also have to guide them and say, look, this would help you if you try this. And I believe, and I always look for in resumes, people who have backgrounds, who have an education in theater. Because it's easier to talk about style if I'm doing a play with style, or it's easier to talk about, you know, let's talk about if this was an Ibsen play, and if they don't know Ibsen, you're sunk, you know?
Unless they're quick learners.
And sometimes you have to teach out there when you're directing. There's
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
of teaching going on, especially when you get a young individual that's brand new.
That's why if you can't do it, you can also teach. I want to ask you something that Nate and I discussed very briefly, and then Nate can get into it. You just rehearsed a show, The Wiz, in Europe. Do you feel, as an American, and an American director who works extensively in this country, but also works over there, that you have to have sort of a different approach for European audiences and European talent?
I think yes. I think they are really striving hard to do what we do, especially in the American musical theater. You know, they do their classic plays over there, and I've gone and seen them. I've seen Ibsen over there, and you know, it's where it all came from. But with the American musical theater, they're trying to do what we do, so they want to really emulate what we do. So I think that finding the talent isn't as easy as in the United States. There might be, for each role, one person that's great,
Really?
and two others that are okay. Some others, you know, if it's a role, you might be able to find 5 or 6 people. The girl who plays the lead in The Wiz was very special. And I think even if I was casting in the United States, I would have cast her. She's pretty remarkable. She's got a great voice, but she's got an honest presence. And brand new for her, and she's sensational to watch.
What do you think of this reality TV show that Andrew Lloyd Webber has just launched? Because he's producing The Sound of Music with another British producer, whereby they had a talent search for somebody to play Maria. They found somebody. I mean, it's a very nice gimmick. It's a great promotion. But do you think it helps the director, hinders the director, or do you think it's just a plain gimmick?
I think it won't hinder the director, because I don't know how truthful the results will be.
Right.
But
Good
I
point.
do think that it's great marketing for the play.
Sure.
They're also doing it here, if you know or not. They're doing a TV show here
Yeah.
called You're the One That I Want,
That's
about
right.
Greece, that Kathleen
Yeah,
Marshall is
yeah,
doing.
yeah, I know.
And that starts in spring.
That brings me to a question I had, where television and theater are sort of becoming intermingled even more so than in the past. Now, you do television. You've done television, I know that, and certainly you do stage. But do you see that as a problem, or maybe something that helps both in genres?
I think it helps both genres. I think that, you know, television, film stars, pop stars, I think that they all help. Again, today, whatever brings an audience in, especially if it's a young audience, I believe it's a good thing. They have Usher right now in Chicago. and it's doing good business.
And they've extended them for 2 weeks, I read today.
And I think it's good because the
Yeah.
kids who like Usher will go see Chicago. And that's anything that'll bring a young person into theater.
And
I
introduce them
believe
to
in.
the theater.
I believe in that.
Right.
And I believe in that the TV stars that are now doing theater are just helping box office. It's because it's hard today, as you know, we've talked about this before, to raise the money. Tours die on the road now because there's no star, and you need somebody of a name to anchor the show. And I think that's important today. So
Do you have a
I think it's
preference
good.
when you direct, stage or TV?
I really prefer the stage. I did enjoy television, you know, when I was doing it. I feel that it's not as much a director's medium, more of a writer's medium. And I like the stage. I like the variety in the stage, you know.
Sure.
Because I go from musicals to dramas to comedies, and it's just great to do all of it.
In the last 3 years, I think that I've known you, you've really gotten a lot of work overseas. I mean, we put big budget projects
Yes.
and well-known shows. Is that where one thing builds upon the other, and you develop a reputation as a director in comparison to other things you've done, other directors, and so they're more inclined to ask you to do other projects?
I think that's part of it. I think that, you know, I was lucky enough to get involved with Disney for Beauty and the Beast in Europe, and we're now copying Beauty and the Beast in 5, 6 countries over there. And from that, other people saw that, and it's the same producer who's doing The Wiz. The Wiz is probably the hardest show I've ever done, bar none.
Really? Why is that?
You know, it's interesting. With the director today, you also, we're talking about the director today, you have to keep up on the new media. So The Wiz has projections, live feed video, double projections, computer feed monitors, and lighting. The lighting is incredible.
You got to
and
be an engineer and a
I was
bring
going to
all
say
that
that, there's a
together.
lot of things that you just mentioned that normally I guess people wouldn't think about a director has to know or experience he has to have, areas he has to have experience in.
I think we have a clip of The
Yeah,
Wiz,
you have some visuals with you that we can take a look at.
which will show you the use of the lighting and the video. It's a very colorful show, and Dave Gallo, who won the Tony last year for Drowsy Chaperone, designed the set. So,
Oh, did he?
Yeah. And the lighting designer is Tom Halsey, and they're both working on this new company that's going to Broadway that everybody plays the instruments, like the Sweeney Todd.
Well, it's like, yeah, exactly with the same director.
It is, yes.
Yeah, because it's Sondheim.
Yes.
And it created a whole new thing. They've got about 7 people in the cast, and the actors play the instruments, and it's a whole new concept.
Both of these designers have worked on The Wiz.
They really are amazingly rich. That's the only terminology that I can use, because what it does, it has adapted. Nate asked you, do you like television or stage, etc.? It's adapted a lot of techniques of the motion picture view, and spectacle, some people consider it to be a dirty word, has taken over the whole kind of thrust, if you will, of the musical.
Yeah, and I think people today, if they're going to spend that kind of money, want to go in and see spectacle. I think that's what they're looking at, spectacle, when you go in. What I try to do with The Wiz is, because it's an MTV generation, I try to do it like MTV show. So when you see the clips, it's got those fast clips, but when you're looking at it, it's very colorful. It moves fast like an MTV show. It's got references to the rap artists. It's got modern references. It's got modern references to Apple and to Starbucks, and I really tried to make
Really?
it modern today.
That's interesting.
What prepares a person to be a director? I mean, you mentioned engineering, technology, MTV. Certainly there's a stage training, there's a television training. There's a lot that goes into what you do, as opposed to just moving actors around and telling them where to stand and where to talk.
Mm-hmm. I think the bottom line with everything, I think, Mike, we've alluded to this before, the bottom line for a good director is to be a storyteller. If you can't tell the story, all the other stuff doesn't matter. But you've got to be a good storyteller. And it doesn't matter how you get to the storytelling. There are directors that do the storytelling all visually. They, you know, Hal Prince, great storyteller, but it's very visual. It's not an actor-driven story. It's a visual story, which is always remarkable. Evita, you know, Phantom, all the stuff that Hal, Parade, which was one of my favorites. Very, very visual-oriented. Des McAnuff, very visual. He's also doing The Wiz in the States. It's going to go to Broadway
Oh, yeah,
eventually. And I think that, you know, the bottom line is storytelling. And when I start my directing class, I start with them to try to tell them to do a visual story of their life. They know the story.
I've heard from some of the actors that you are an actor's director. As an actor, I prefer actor's director. But how would you define that in comparison to some of the other titles, or tour director? Or
Well, for many years, I wanted to be an actor. So all through my schooling, I wanted to act and direct, and I realized soon on that you really can't do both too much. I think you've got to decide eventually what you want. But from doing the acting, I understand the problems. I understand where people are. I understand where people have had too much, or how to get to somebody and break them down, because I've gone through the actor training. I mean, that's part of my background. And I moved to LA to be a television actor and did some of that. And so even doing TV, I knew what it was like to be on this side of the camera. So it was, you know, one of those things that you just learn what an actor does. And I like actors. You know, there are directors that don't
Some
like
directors
actors.
don't like
but-
actors.
And
But you
I
see-
love actors.
I don't understand that. I did a musical a number of years ago, and the director was a choreographer. And I never believed in having a director and choreographer play the same role. And I learned my lesson then. This fellow, unfortunately, did not know how to treat actors. He did not know how to encourage them. He did not know, you know this better than me, there is a sensitivity to criticizing them, so you don't tear them down emotionally. And this guy was just, you know, you can't be dismissive. That's why what you brought up, Nate, is such a vital part of it. Actors, director is really important, you know, because they're the people that are up there. They make you look good, they make you look bad, but whatever. You know?
And I say that to them. I say, you know what? You're up there. I'm not. You're up there. That's why I try to encourage that.
Yeah. Well, because as an actor, if you put a wall between myself and any other actor and the director in the line of communication, then you're creating a major hurdle for yourself in order to get the best out of that particular actor.
I agree. And I think that, you know, with working with actors, you also have to know when to criticize, because they're so fragile at times.
What buttons to push and when to push them.
And what you're working on that has nothing to do with the show. I mean, as they get closer to opening night, everything starts to rise up and it becomes different. And again, you've got to field all that and say, okay, well, that's just because of this, or we can fix this by this, or if you're having an issue with this and this handkerchief's bothering you, I'll take the handkerchief away.
Can there come a time when the industry itself has bypassed the director, or can a director not be involved enough where he's not up with this the current trend, say, of directing, the technology?
Yeah, you know, I think you're always going to have a knowledge of what's new. I think you know, lighting changes every year. I mean, the different possibilities with lighting. Now we're getting into projections. Projections are starting to take place of hard sets. I think you've got to be up on projections. You've got to be up on the capability of projections, what you can and can't do. I just went through like a master class with this guy who does these projections. He does it on the computer. Anything you want is possible. Any color you want is possible. So then, with all those possibilities, then you have to go home and do more homework trying to decide what you want, because you can't just say put anything up there.
You like that challenge? I mean, does it?
It was interesting.
Is it still artistic for you?
It is. It is artistic, and it makes the tech process more tedious, because you've got to sit in the tech and say, can that be bluer? And then he goes in the computer and makes it bluer. Or can a bird pass here? Okay.
Computer. That's the key word. You know, everybody says the producer is the boss, and to a great extent it's true, because he has to take care of everybody. However, a producer's relationship with a director is really vitally important, because if a producer and a director don't get along, you got a lot of problems. That doesn't mean they can't have differences of opinion. You know, creative producers who feel that they understand the written word, who understand the musical score, etc., can work with a producer and be the other eye and say, you know something, Glenn, that scene 2 where you got it doesn't work, and I'll tell you why. And the director can say to the producer, no, you're wrong because. But that is healthy, isn't it?
Yeah. I definitely think that. I also am a director that believes in collaboration.
effort.
And you know, if a producer comes to me and sits next to me, I want a producer to say what they want to say. I'd rather have that discussion rather than somebody, which I've had before, be silent and not know what he's thinking. I'd rather you come and say, look, this is bothering me because it gives me a fresh eye. Mm-hmm. I don't have an ego about it. I mean, I'll tell you if I don't agree.
Oh, that's you should.
And I will tell you very clearly. But, you know, I look at it and I say, okay, well, you know, he's coming in fresh because a producer doesn't come in every day either. So when they come in, it's fresh. So they see something you've been looking at for 3 weeks and not even noticing. And I like that.
Now, you wouldn't normally say this, and I guess most people wouldn't even normally ask you this, but what do you think you do better than most directors that keeps you working as often as you do and on the kind of projects that you get?
You know, Hal Prince said one day, I had an interview with Hal Prince, and he said, to be a working director, you have to do 2 things. Get along with people and deliver the product. And I think to me, it's about that. I got to deliver the product they asked me to deliver. So I don't get involved in all this stuff. I just try to go, everything's about delivering the product and getting along with everybody. You know, I have to get along with everybody on the team. So, you know, I think one thing, and it's, again, hard to say because you're saying it about yourself, but if you ask people why they like working with me, it's because they have a good time. I feel too much of the joy of what we do has been taken out of the business. And I try to make it joyful because very few of us, as you know, get to work in this business. And when we do, we're very lucky and we should be joyful that we're doing it. And that's taken away from the theater today. And so I try to put that in and everybody's like, oh, this is fun again. Well, and that's another reason why we do what we do, because it makes us fresh here.
Well, like you do. Yeah, if you like it. Yeah.
Well, also fresh teaching the kids.
Right, exactly.
You know, we have hands-on and I get an energy from these students.
You're absolutely
I know Nate
right.
does too.
It's like you say you do that, and you're quite right. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's also important, and a lot of producers don't do this. A lot of my contemporaries and colleagues, etc., when I'm with a show, whether it be on the road or wherever it is, and especially a musical, I go from room to room just to say, hi, how you doing, to the chorus kids, to the leads, etc., because it shows them that the guy who was the producer, you know, cares about them. And consequently, honestly, I really feel this, they will put out that much more for you.
I believe that too, Mike. I do the same thing. I treat the chorus not like a chorus. I really talk to them as individuals.
Exactly.
I open up conversation for them. I allow them to talk to me. I let them do character bios so that we can talk one-on-one instead of treating them as a group.
Very good.
I also, wherever I go backstage and introduce myself to all the stage crew, because they're going to make or break you.
Oh, yeah. And, yeah, it's experience everybody
They
has.
can kill you if you don't watch out.
And
Let me.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
ask, when you're looking for a director, you have the vita, the resume, the list of work that they've done. Do you also go and see the work that they've actually produced if you can? And do you ask and inquire about working with that director?
Sometimes I do. There's no question about it. What you do is, let's say if you're doing a drama, naturally you want someone. If you're some producers take a real shot. Mm-hmm. By that I mean they take a real chance, which is fine. But you want to take a look at someone who has an intrinsic belief, desire, and awareness of what that dramatic piece is. You know, like a revival of The Death of a Salesman. The guy from Chicago Falls, Robert Falls. Really did a wonderful job, because when you do something, I want to ask you about that. When you do a classic revival and you're a director, you got to be very careful. Now you're about to do one. You're about to do Camelot. There isn't more of a classic musical than that. I did it.
Everybody knows it, yes.
I did it with Richard Burton in 1981. And because he created it in I don't know what it was, 60 or something like that. And you want to make sure that you have a little bit of difference. How do you feel as a director about doing a classic like you're doing Camelot, and did not just saying, okay, let's go through the motions, etc. And you've got Michael York, who's a very prominent and well-known star.
I think Camelot, first of all, is a show, as you know, that has had its problems along the way, and But I think it's a show that has such weight on a lot of levels. I think the book is very good. I think it needs work. I think the music is exceptional, and they've allowed us to kind of tinker with it as we go. I went back to the novel that they went back to, The Once and Future King, and I think that's the way to go back and really redo something that we've done before. I think you've got to go back to the original source. I think Death of a Salesman, or Jerry Gutierrez did that wonderful production, The Heiress, with Cherry Jones a few years ago. It was like you haven't seen The Heiress before, because he went back to the book, the Washington Square novel, and found some new elements. Same thing with Camelot. And now there's a wealth of information about Camelot, about that whole Arthur tale. Mists of Avalon tells the woman's point of view. And today we have to look at that woman in Camelot, who in the original script sits in the background and needlepoints. Well, today she can't needlepoint, and she can't sit in the background. So that's part of where I'm starting.
Sure. And that's vitally important because you give them something fresh.
And the look of it. I mean, it's not gonna look like the old Camelot. I found a passage that said that where Arthur was born, where they feel Arthur lived in England, the ground had copper in it. So a lot of the set is from copper ore and has a copper look to it, which is rich and nice and interesting. So,
Funny thing is, you've got Michael York playing Arthur, and I mentioned to you in a private conversation that when I did the revival of Camelot in England, and Richard Harris ended up doing it, I approached Michael York and had a conversation with him, and at that time, he couldn't have been nicer. First of all, he's a very gracious, as you know, working with him, and a charming guy. And he was very flattered, and he said, I love the part, but I don't want to do it. So 20 years later, you come along, and boom, he's doing it. But he's the perennial youth. He looks wonderful,
he looks great.
York.
The trick is going to be cast the other two characters, Guinevere and Lancelot.
I'd like to talk about working with stars, but you mentioned something that I think the audience may be interested in. You mentioned a knowledge of the history of theater, certainly a history of this particular play, but you also mentioned reading and a knowledge of literature itself. Mm-hmm. Those things are very important to be a director as well, I would guess. Absolutely,
and again, I think that anybody who wants to be a director, I believe the educational system will help you have the foundation you need. I think your knowledge of history of theater, your knowledge of styles, your knowledge of just culture. What culture is happening at what time? And I think today with computers it's a lot easier. When I first started directing, I'd have to go to the library for hours looking up, where Arthur. Today you go on Google and you get it in a second. So I mean, there's a lot more information available to us. And I believe that's really important to do.
Are directors coming out now, young directors coming out now with that kind of knowledge? Or is there a different feeling or philosophy they may have as to what a director is?
I believe, there's a handful of directors that work on Broadway. You could look at the Broadway listings and you see the same 6 or 7 names.
But that happens all the time. That happens with decades.
And it changes.
And then it changes, right.
It changes. And most of the directors there now have come out of the university setting.
What exactly changes? I'm not
Who
sure.
the directors are that are working on Broadway.
Names, okay.
Yeah, like now there's 6, but 10 years ago there were 6 others.
There were other 6, like 10, 20 years ago.
That's
now
right.
There are,
But the training of directors hasn't changed yet.
No, and I think if you look at the directors on Broadway now, some
Joe Mantello, Scott Ellis,
they all
like
come out of
caliber.
university training, and some of them come out of Yale, and some of them come from North Carolina School of the Arts, Joe Mantello.
Right.
And I think that those kind of directors, are the directors that work and do the revivals of shows that have weight like that. Do the Ibsen or the whatever they do, Three Penny Opera, or, and there's a lot of things that are being rediscovered on Broadway.
Well, we were talking about revivals, and one revival, especially continually will never stop, is Hamlet. You take a look at all the different productions of Hamlet, it's like seeing a different show. Seeing Ralph Fiennes do Hamlet is qualitatively different than seeing anybody else do Hamlet.
Absolutely.
And it'll never stop, will it?
No. Look at Broadway this year. Les Mis and Chorus Line is coming back.
Right.
Well, Les Mis will be forever, I think.
Yeah, and it's wild.
Let's talk about working with stars, if we may. Of course, you direct on the academic level as well, but you do these shows where you have major stars, and sometimes you go out and you're creating a major star now. Mm-hmm. Is that different for you, working with an established name, a person who has a history behind them that a lot of people already know?
Yeah, I mean, Funny story, when I first started working in LA, I got a job directing Noises Off with Katherine Grayson, who's an old MGM movie
Noises
star.
off, yeah.
So, first day of rehearsal, I went to rehearsal, I blocked the first scene, and I said, okay, let's run the scene. No retention of what we just did.
Because she was a motion picture actress, is
And
that why?
Yeah, and it was hard for her to pick up quick, and we only had 2 weeks rehearsal for Noises Off, you know. So
And Noise Off is very complex directorial.
very
You got
difficult
people running in and out of
Right.
doors, climbing out of windows, etc.
So we went through the show, and we went through that day. At the end of the day, I said, I got to call the producer. Talk about producer relationships. Great producer, Herb Rogers. I worked for him for a long time. But I went to the phone, I called him, and I said, this isn't going to work. She's not going to be able to do it. He said, you're fired. I said, excuse me? He said, go out and look at the marquee. It says Katherine Grayson and Noises Off. Nobody knows who the hell you are. If you can't make it work, I'll get somebody in here who can. I said, I'll talk to you later. And it went good. But I think that's the thing I learned about working with stars, that they're selling the tickets. And
Did she come around? Was she
she
able
came
to?
around. It was great. It was very good, well received, and
But do they become more of your focus with that type of learning, of education? Do that?
you have to protect the star. If you have a star in your show, it's your job as the director to make sure you're protecting that star. And you know, I know when I have a star, and I've worked with many, many, many of them, that my job is there to make sure they're okay, because their name is above the title.
That's an extra burden on you as a director.
No, he's absolutely right. Talk about revivals. I did a revival of My Fair Lady with the original star Rex Harrison, may he rest in peace, who was brilliant. I got a British director named Patrick Garland. And the great Patrick Garland's a very, very good director and a very illiterate guy. But the best thing about Patrick Garland is Rex Harrison was, rest his soul, overwhelmingly temperamental. Patrick Garland knew every move and how to handle it. He knew what to do. That was worth everything. If he got crazy, Patrick Garland calmed down. If he was out of sorts with a certain scene, Patrick Garland knew how to straighten it out. That is also a vital factor of a director, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
In keeping with the story you just told us.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and you know, the stars I've worked with, Carol Burnett was incredible when I've worked with her.
I would think she would be. I would be disappointed if I heard she were not.
She was incredible, and you know, I've had a lot of those kind of opportunities to work with people that just were just unbelievable. Joanne Worley is a comedian, and when you work with a comedian, there's a different attack with a comedian. They've got to be free. You've got to allow some behavior that's not normal, so they can be free to do what they do. And I think that's also a skill to say, again, the psychology of it, what do I need here? Even Carol, I mean, Carol worked differently than a lot of people. She works, you know, I need to see what my hair and my shoes and my costume look like before I start my character. And that's cool. You know?
That's understandable, too.
And Bob Mackie came in, and you understand why their relationship was good, because you could see what he'd create with her.
And she had confidence in him.
Absolutely.
He's a great costume designer.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you a question. We talked, I think Nate mentioned before about actors becoming directors. Why is it that some actors stop acting, become terrific directors, and other actors, good actors, don't have a clue?
I think, again, if you understand how to step out of it and tell the story from the outside, you can do it. If you can't ever get from inside, you'll never be able to tell the story. And I think that's the difference.
Okay, that's a very good point. I understand.
What about working with student actors? I mean, stars represent one kind of burden. What about student actors? Because I would guess they're not as secure. And I'm also guessing if they're working with you at this point, you can be sort of intimidating, knowing you know, what kind of work you do and how you can help their careers.
I think an actor if an actor comes
And do you think you're intimidating? I should ask that.
do I think I'm intimidating?
Yeah, to students.
I don't think I am.
Well,
but-
you may not think you are, but
How about when you have to be?
I think I can be tough, and I think they see that. But I think, you know, if they're in a university setting and
Mike, I've seen this guy in meetings. He can be
Oh, I
tough.
see.
Mike.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you know more than I do. Then.
I think if you have a student that wants to be a professional actor, I come here and, like you, I believe these students are here, they want to have this as a career. So I treat them as professionals right now, and what I expect from a professional, because if we don't do it here, they're going to fail out there.
Exactly.
And I know you believe that,
Exactly.
but I believe that if you're going to be in a play that I'm directing here, I'm going to treat you like I do Carol Burnett or anybody. Because
Exactly
why
right.
not?
Right.
Exactly right.
You
That's
know,
a very,
and-
very healthy point of view.
And I know you feel the same way.
Oh, I felt exactly
You can't
the
be
same way.
patronizing.
No.
You guys are teachers.
Right.
Consequently, in addition to doing everything else, consequently, you understand that. You cannot be patronizing to a student who is doing his or her very best, whether they be actors or whether they be playwrights that you work with, etc.
And Nate and I both are into placement of these students. We want them to get out of here and work, not get out of here and just go on their way and not know where to go.
Make them competitive and make them aware.
We're
Exactly.
trying to prepare them for that. So that's how I do. You know, I directed Intimate Apparel last year, and I really it was tough on those actors because it was a tough show, and they had to come up. And I treat them the same.
Exactly. See, what we're trying to do, and both of you know this extremely well, what we're trying to do with this video, producing for the theater, the 12th part of it that'll be shown to university students and hopefully in other areas as well, is to let students and other people who look at this know what the complexities, what the shadings, what the colors are of producing a play or a musical. It's not just, hey, let's do a play. You know, it's unglamorous about raising the money, darn it, and it's
Stressful.
absolutely overwhelmingly stressful. See this gray hair? I'm only 24 years old. Look how bad I look. But seriously, you have to go through every aspect of it, and we hope that this, and having somebody like you and the other guests that we've had from all walks of theatrical life, be able to disseminate their experiences and their feelings and their mistakes of everything that's happened in the theater. And that's why you can't really do enough with experts like you as far as what is your experience with this and what is your experience with that. That's why we're asking you these questions. The people that will watch this will benefit from it, you know. That's the important thing.
Good.
And you still seem to have that joy that you said you had when you graduated from college in directing.
Oh yeah. You know, again, I feel, and I try to tell our students this, if you're lucky enough to be able to work in this profession, you should be glad, because there are a lot of people in our profession that are not working.
That don't work and
So
never have worked.
what
right?
keeps
So-
me joyful is here I am doing something that I've wanted to do all my life. So what more could I want? I mean, and I'm being paid for it, which is the nice thing.
Is there any show that you want to get your hands on that you haven't directed yet?
Oy, a lot
There's a
of
long
people
list of
ask me
them.
that. No, you know, I really have I have done most of the musicals that I've wanted to do. I've done most of the straight plays I've wanted to do. You know, I like working on new works. So when new plays come up, I'm going to do a world premiere of a new play in LA in June.
What is it?
It's called The Last Mass at St. Casimir's by Tom Dudzik. He wrote a play called Over the Tavern, and this is the third in this trilogy, and it's going to world premiere in LA. And just to have a new play in my hand.
I like the idea of that.
Yeah.
Well, in saying that, isn't it a kind of refreshing and different approach for a director to do a brand new play? Because don't you then, you as a director, sit down with the playwright and work on certain scenes with him?
Absolutely. In fact, through the graduate collaboration class here, we're bringing the playwright in and the producer, Tom McCoy, and we're going to sit and do a reading and have the students see us in the work session so they can see how we dissect the play and change it and, you know, put it to the next phase, which is the audition phase in January. So, you know, the students here will be able to really be involved in that, which I think is good.
Sure, because that is the best way, rather than, I always have said, when I taught a couple of courses, not as extensively as you fellas, but a couple here, and that's how this show started, and that's how it gave birth to, I have always said, textbook theater is not really theater. You've got to do it. People
have
have
to
got
do
to
it.
work with guys like you, both of you, and they have got to, and for them to sit in on a session of that nature is overwhelmingly important. Instead of saying, read chapter 11 and 12, and then tell me what you feel.
And I think that also is important to go along with it, because I do ask them to read chapter 11
sure,
and 12 to
as
go
a
along
supplement.
with it. Right.
Oh,
And I
absolutely.
think Nate and I have agreed on this. We believe in bringing professionals in to give them that hands-on responsibility, you know?
And that's the one thing that you can do as a working professional and an academic. You can sort of bridge the gap between the two.
And we both have been into placement here. We've placed a lot of students in that professional world, which is great.
Of course. And it's very fulfilling for you guys.
But getting back to
you've accomplished something.
the question of the working on a new play with the playwright, it's great. I mean, it's just great. This guy, I've worked with him before. He's very open. It's a piece that he knows. He's written about his family, and the first two episodes of it were very well received. And it takes place in up near the upstate New York in Buffalo, and it takes place in a bar that's been in by a snow. They're all bound inside by a snowdrift. So it's interesting. It's family drama.
What do you look for when you read a new play that would interest you to direct it?
You know, I kind of read a play, and if it moves me in any way, makes me laugh, makes me cry, makes me, whatever, I just try to read it without directing it at first. And whatever I feel, I just have this feeling that, oh, I like this. And, Disney's doing right now High School, the musical, this phenomenon that's out. They did a TV movie of it last year, and now they're doing a play. So they called the other day, said, would you be interested in doing High School, the musical?
Disney can do anything they want.
I know.
They got a couple of bucks.
So, but my thing was, I want to read it first, because
Sure.
I saw the movie, but the movie was good, but what is the script
How does
like?
it translate?
Right, so I'll see.
You said reading and not directing. So you can read a play and not see where you want to move people and what colors you want. And
I think it's important to do that first.
you can do that easily with no problem?
It isn't easy, but it's the thing that I try to do is read a play in one sitting so that I can see where I cried, where I laughed, because I know that's what I have to then do, is make that work for the audience. But if I'm never the audience, I'll
Right.
never know what to get. So I try to be the audience at first, and I try not to block it, or I just try to read it.
You just want to know, what are the words doing to me? What are the situation doing to me? An extension of that, let's say, as Nate said, you read something and you want to do it, and you decide to do it. Isn't it a very vitally important factor to find a designer, a scenic designer, that is going to be able to project the soul, if you will, not to be corny, but the soul, the empathy, the feeling, the drama with a capital D of the play with the scenic design?
I think yes. I think it's important to have all three of those elements good. Scenic, costume, and lights nowadays. I think it's got to be all together. And you have to marry the three. I think the scenic designer, because that visual element is there, but if you don't get somebody good to light it, you're dead. And if you don't get somebody good to do the costumes, you're dead, because I think all three of them add to the storytelling today.
Absolutely. If it's the wrong scenic design, it can ruin a play.
And I think they all have to get along and be able to communicate. And, a
Yeah.
lot of things today are done on telephone, faxes, because everybody's all over the country. And that's hard, because still you've got to communicate, and if it's not
You have to
communicated-
I believe in getting into a room together.
Me too.
It's vitally important.
But you're assembling this staff, correct? The producer's
The producer,
assembling
yeah.
it.
But the director has a say, and a say who no. You could say no.
Oh, you can?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
A producer would go, let's say, Glenn has decided to do a play that I want to do. And then I got a great idea for a scenic designer. I would not hire that scenic designer or that lighting director without discussing it with the director.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
So the director's your first hire as a producer.
Absolutely.
And then everybody else
Because
comes after that.
if a director says, I think a scenic designer is great, and I say to the director, this is the scenic design, the director says, he's a very talented guy, but he's wrong for this project because. A producer has to listen to that input from a director, I mean, that's vitally important. And just to change the subject slightly, you're going to do Camelot, and you've done a lot of musicals, and Wiz, etc. How does a director work with a choreographer to make the choreography and the book, if you will, if there is a book, a storyline, cling together and become seamless?
I can tell you, yeah, with Camelot, it's going to be not as hard because of the book is so heavy. But I think, again, it's all storytelling. how does the choreographer tell the story, and that we're both telling the same story. I just worked with Anthony Von Last, who did Bombay Dreams and Mamma Mia,
Yeah.
and what we did is we spent 4 or 5 days in London in a room and went through the whole show piece by piece, where I'd pick up, where he'd leave off. I choreographed some things too, not extensive, so when I do movement, I try to stay in the movement of the choreographer, and he tries to stay in the movement of me.
Right.
And I'll again want a choreographer that I can really talk about what's the story here.
The choreographer initially works with the dancers over there, you work with the actors over here, and then after a period of time, boom, they come together and make it a unit, an entity. Is that correct?
And because of that, you have to do so much pre-production with that
Oh.
choreographer, because he's over there, and it's too late when he comes in the room to say, I don't really like that. I mean, it happens, but you try to avoid that.
Many years ago, you had a book, and all of a sudden they just burst into song or burst into dance. But I think, even before my time, that the first musical that had a perfect blending of song, dance, and book was Oklahoma.
West Side
because-
Story too.
Well, but West Side Story came after. I'm
yeah.
talking about Oklahoma. You're a baby. You don't know about that. Oklahoma, which was in the 40s, was the first story. West Side Story was brilliant, of course, but that happened when? Late 50s or whatever,
yeah.
you know. But I'm talking about they used to do the book, and all of a sudden stop, and somebody would burst into song or do a dance.
the movie
Well, now
version
it's
of
a whole flow. As I said, seamless, right?
Yeah, and now everything's underscored. You've got everything underscored, and
Yeah,
it
yeah.
kind of all works as one
Very
piece.
important because it gives it a thematic flavor to a musical, you know. So I think it's all meaningful. That to use the terminology collaborative, it is so collaborative, pardon me, that it is beyond any kind of understanding. If you don't collaborate, all the creative people, director, scenic designer, producer, hopefully he's a creative producer, etc., then your show is going to falter and fail. And I'm really very, very pleased that we had the opportunity of talking to Glen and finding out what you're doing, because you've been kind enough to be in that chair as a co-host talking to other people. But that's very good, because both of you guys understand what it takes for all these varied and sundry creative elements to put it all together, to make it a play, to make it a musical. And that's why we feel that this video that we have done, and I want to thank you very much for coming here. And
You're welcome.
Nate,
Thank you, sir.
You're
My
welcome.
pleasure.
again, thanks a lot, pal.
Always good to be here.
Really a pleasure.
Enjoy it.
And we just hope that you understand and realize the complexities of what it takes for producing for the theater.